Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on the Return of the King podcast, a very special edition of Iron Sharpens Iron. I am Joe Moreau, your humble host of Return of the King, and joining me today, again, my brother in Christ and one of the men I most truly admire personally, Jesse Evans of Christ is King Action. And this is where you can find Jesse on Instagram at christ.is.king.action, YouTube, his website's right there, ctkrules.org. Feel free to follow Jesse and like his content and share it with others. He's doing amazing work for the kingdom of God and for the social reign of Christ the King, and really doing amazing work inspiring men to be Catholic men in every true sense of the word and take their vocation seriously. And I've told you all before that Jesse's one of those guys that I personally am inspired by and learn a lot from. We are doing a part 2 tonight. So those of you that watched us, what was about a week or so ago, we did a part 1 on this, on What a Woman Is Not, a response to Timothy Gordon. And that podcast ran us into over 2 hours of a conversation, almost 2.5 hours. And we realized by the end of it, there's still a lot more we have to go through. We kind of rushed a lot at the end and realized, let's just do a part 2. And so this is our part 2, and we're grateful to have all of you here with us. And of course, you can find us as well, Return the King podcast at patreon.com/Return the King. We have over 40 podcasts there. We update normally about 5 to 6 or 7 podcasts a month exclusively for members of our Patreon. YouTube and Spotify, Return the King podcast. Please like and subscribe and share. Comment on this video, like it, share it with everybody so that they can find it. They can find the information. And social media, Instagram, Return the King podcast is our main handle. My personal handle is my first and last name, Joe Moreau. Before, Jesse, I have you say the first word. Let's actually start with opening prayer. And Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our defense against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. Do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan, and all evil spirits, who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. Saint Joseph, pray for us. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. All right, we're going to go ahead and get kickstarted in this part 2. Jesse, anything you'd like to say off the bat before we kind of really get into the meat and potatoes of this thing?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this next video. I think we covered a lot in the couple hours of this first one, getting through just in the initial, problems that we were seeing. But I think this one, we've got a lot to get through in this one, so I don't want to say too much, but I think there's, some various distortions of church teaching, so maybe some misunderstanding of church teaching, and particularly the distortions of Augustine, and many other things. I'm excited to get into it. So,
yeah, and just to remind everyone too that's watching, if you want to have a comment or a question that you want answered by myself and Jesse, and you want it featured and addressed immediately, take advantage of the super chat in the comment section. If you do a super chat, we will pause conversation and get to your question with VIP service and get it addressed, just so all of you know. And to start with part 2, what we want to do is show you a very brief video clip. We showed this in our part 1. We're going to show it here at the start of part 2 to give you all an idea of the type of stuff that an idea of the program and the presentation that we are going against and trying to do something different. We're trying to give a different understanding of what it means to have patriarchy, but this is what we're responding to. So let me go ahead and get that up for you all so you get an idea of what we're talking about.
Great deal more.
Yeah.
If there's more intimacy in the marital bedroom, all of America's big problems go away. I'm serious. All of the church's big problems go away. If there's more sexual intimacy in the marital bedroom, there's no looking around. There's no porn epidemic among married people is solved overnight. Divorce issues solved overnight. Fighting too much but not getting divorced is solved overnight.
All right. So in a nutshell, essentially, what Timothy Gordon is proposing there is that, more sex and more intimacy is going to solve all the problems of the world. and is going to solve all the problems of the country and of the church and of marriages, and that's what it's going to be. That's the presentation he gives. This right here demonstrates for us what it is that we are trying to contrast with. This is the central error that Timothy Gordon presents to us. His vision of Catholic patriarchy is not rooted in virtue, but in male pleasure and female submission. It's not as Christ loved the church, but as a man demanding what he desires. Okay. That right there is the central error of what Gordon is presenting. And we said very clearly on part 1 that, we also, look at where we stand against feminism. And we even pointed out there's a lot of things that Gordon says that's good against feminism, right? We also support patriarchy. I mean, it's central to Catholic Action Group that Jesse leads and to the work that we do, Return the King. We're Catholic husbands. We are pro-patriarchy, but it has to be a virtuous patriarchy, not one tainted with the world. Okay, so what we are proposing, in contrast to Gordon, is what we call the real Catholic standard, which is here. Patriarchy is rooted in male responsibility, self-sacrifice, and leadership, not self-indulgence. We need a virtuous, holy, and chivalrous patriarchy. That's what we're trying to present to you all with this series, with what a woman is not, part 2. Before we get into some of the main points, Jesse, anything you want to share as far as feedback you received after doing part 1 a couple weeks ago? What kind of response did you get from people that watched it?
I mostly received good responses from other traditional Catholic men who were, some of them not even that aware of Timothy Gordon's content. So for some men, it was kind of an introduction to his content, and others took a look and gave me feedback that they were even just shocked that there was somebody sort of positioning themselves as an influencer, a traditional Catholic influencer. It's almost laughable to some people, and I think it should be laughable. I think, like what we observed in the last video, it's the kind of stuff. The last video we talked about their video on the marital debt. So their video is all about the marital debt, and there were a number of problems like that were really right in line with essentially that overarching principle, which you can see from that last clip, and that is that he thinks that more marital intimacy, more indulgence, more pleasure, more fun, more good times, basically, between the spouses means all the problems in the world go away, and you tie that in with some of the stuff that we pulled out of the video that he had originally put out that suggests that women need to be submissive, which they do, but he said he's framing it, and it almost has just these strong sexual overtones, and then you get to the end of that particular video and he's saying that. I think these ideas, they definitely appeal to certain people, but they don't, when people who are trying to grow in virtue, trying to live sacrificially, to love their wives and to lead their homes, they encounter this stuff and they just see it as kind of for what it is, that it's subversive. It's not beneficial. They wouldn't want their wives to see it because they'd be rightly kind of offended, and they're offended because they understand that that this is kind of a juvenile approach, and so it appeals to young men maybe outside the church who aren't practicing virtue and aren't practicing the faith at all, but this view of Catholic patriarchy is that men basically get whatever they want. Women aren't allowed to say no to them. If they do, they're in mortal sin. So really, it's just a blank. It's a blank check, for young men. If you want to become Catholic, forget the red pill community. You can just become Catholic. You can get married. You can have kids. Your wife will never say no to you. She's not allowed to be unhappy with you. She's not allowed to, to say no. So yeah, this definitely appeals to people, but it doesn't appeal to people who are practicing, practicing the faith, trying to live out their lives and grow in holiness. So that I think, has been in large part the responses I've gotten from other good Catholic men.
Yeah, no, that's good to hear. And like, yeah, you said, it's like she's not allowed to say no unless there's grave reason. And that grave reason would be something as, like being hit by a bus, having your legs chopped off. And, yeah, it's crazy. And this is part of our concern. So, and just to remind people, what part one was really all about was Gordon had released a trailer, an extended sneak peek trailer to a documentary he's been working on for some time, apparently, called What a Woman Is. And that's initially what Jess and I were responding to. We did a whole watch long, and then in looking at that trailer and putting notes together, we wanted to make sure that we were representing Gordon accurately. So we started looking into other materials he's put out, videos he's released, and we started getting a ton of notes. And that's really what we covered a lot in part one. And, it's hard because the feedback I got from people, by and large, was positive, which is good. A lot of women were very happy with it, and a lot of men were very supportive of it, saying that a lot of them like Gordon's material, but they're a little uncomfortable with the way he presents it at times, is what I heard from a lot of people. And they liked how you and I were presenting the vision of what patriarchy ought to be. So I got a lot of positive feedback. There were those who, contested what you and I were trying to do, what we were trying to say. And I heard from less than a handful of people, but the idea being like, if Gordon is right, let's say 95% of things, but there's just this 5%, maybe just like brush over the 5% and don't worry about it. The rest of it's good. And that did worry me, because my approach was, one, I wouldn't say that margin of error is that low. It's what you and I were trying to show is it's much larger than that, right? There's something much deeper going on, like you said, subversion. Subversion, which is, truly mixed in half-truths with lies. And those half-truths are compelling because it's presented very well. It's true. We agree with it. These are good things. But in there are little things that bring destruction and for sure can and will lead souls down the wide path that leads to perdition. And so I was making the point to certain people this past week that were saying this to me, the issue is that even if, for the sake of argument, let's say it's 5% that we disagree with, let's just say it's that low, the bar still needs to remain very high in areas that are dealing with sanctity and vocation, right? You have to leave that bar high. There can't be any room for margin of error in how you're presenting that information to a Catholic audience, because you're dealing with sanctification and virtue. You're dealing with virtue versus vice. You have to be crystal clear in what you're saying there. If you allow even parts of the world's ideas of things into that, it's going to poison everything else in time, right? That's the whole thing, especially when you're dealing with things that pertain to, what I've called in the past, the masculinity crisis, and forming strong men to know what vocation is and what their purpose is and what their role is within marriage and all that kind of stuff. So as Catholics, we can't leave a margin for error in how we understand it, how we navigate through all this. I personally know women, holy virtuous women, that have been impacted and affected in relationships where men were influenced by ideas that are presented by Gordon and others. And I know, having, I lead a men's group and I talk to lots of guys, and I can say that it's hard. And a lot of deprogramming very often has to happen. When I meet guys who are influenced by certain ideas of men like Timothy Gordon, right, or him directly, I have to do a lot of deprogramming, because they come in with a whole certain view that isn't very helpful or healthy, and in a lot of ways goes against truly the teachings of the church, which we're going to really get into this video. One thing that happened too since part one, which Jesse, you and I were both very grateful to God for, is Gordon took down that trailer from his YouTube, but in place of it gave us a new trailer. Okay, so one, the documentary is not released yet. It was supposed to be Valentine's Day, the feast day of St. Valentine, and then that got pushed back. But a new trailer came up instead on St. Valentine's Day. And that trailer, we both said, much more streamlined, better to the main points that need to be discussed regarding feminism and patriarchy. And what we thought was really good was he actually censors the immodesty in that one. Whereas part one just had a lot of immodesty, it had profanity, and all that's taken away in part two. So I like to hopefully think that somehow possibly our video helped in some way, through prayer, but it's just a good thing. And now all I can hope for is that the documentary reflects that shift in thinking, and we really don't know. Right? I mean, what are your thoughts on that, brother? I mean, are you thinking
Yeah.
that it impacted or?
Oh yeah, I don't know if our specific episode had an impact there, but maybe some of the feedback that he was getting. I know we tried to give feedback even on his video when it was originally posted. I saw that there were quite a few others who had a problem with the same things we did, and that's what we talked about in the last episode. That he was upset at one point, in calling someone a prude because they were, offended by the basically naked women in his video, and then he called them prudes, and it's kind of like, well, is there something in between being a pervert and a prude? Because that's kind of what we should try to figure out. It's like, let's try to be more virtuous and not put this stuff up. I'm I'm really happy that he took it down, and I was actually kind of impressed with the trailer. I'm like, this is a good trailer. I mean, aside from some objections I have just to the overall thing. Now that we've seen the first trailer, which wasn't the official trailer, but for some reason they posted it anyway, even with all that filth and all of those, superficial, statements about what a woman is. It's embarrassing for them that they even put that out. And I think that that's why they took it down, because somebody, you know, maybe got to them finally. And I don't know, they're trying to get this put onto, I watched one of their recent episodes where they're explaining why they haven't put out the full documentary yet, and they're explaining that they're trying to get a big deal with like a conservative group to
Distributor, yeah.
host putting the video out. So yeah, so they took it down and they cleaned it up, and obviously there's something going on there, because even the Mike Pentel, who has the neck tattoo is blurred out in their little trailer. So for some reason they went from oh, what's wrong with you prudes, to now they're blurring out neck tattoos. So there's obviously something going on there where for whatever reason they're cleaning up their content. So as much as people will push back at us for saying, oh, Timothy Gordon's content in general and the old video that was up is perverted and kind of disgusting, especially if you call yourself a traditional Catholic, people are pushing back on us about that. Maybe they should ask, well, why'd Timmy take it down? Why'd they remove that? Why are they blurring out Mike Pentel's neck tattoo?
Yeah.
It's just, fascinating stuff. So, I mean, moderately fascinating, not that fascinating, just moderately fascinating.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. And, one of the things, of course, that we touched on in part one and in our research for all of this was that Gordon is borrowing information, a lot of it you can tell inspired and influenced by Theology of the Body of John Paul II. And even in my own personal studies of Theology of the Body, to me, a lot of it comes much more so from quote unquote lay experts of Theology of the Body, not necessarily verbatim from John Paul II, but from lay experts, as they call themselves, that write about Theology of the Body. And, one thing that so today's episode, just so everyone knows, I showed this in part one, this screenshot here. This is a video featuring Timothy Gordon and Will Noland that they did on essentially what is permitted, what marital acts are permitted in the bedroom, more or less. And as I said in part one, there were whole clips that we couldn't show because the content was scandalous. The topics of discussion, not to mention scandal mixed with so much error. But one of the things that, and then plus with part one, like I said, we were 2 hours in and we hadn't even touched on that video yet. So that's what this one's going to get much more into, is that video. But one of the things I noticed a lot was they talk a lot in that video about, 20th century moral theologians are now saying this type thing. And a lot of these theologians are really what were direct influences on Theology of the Body. Right. So it's a very novel type approach that they're taking, but it gives a lot of misinformation to Catholic husbands, which can lead to all sorts of vice within marriage, which isn't good. Obviously, one of the other issues, too, in regards to that in the documentary trailer in itself, is that we learned that it features Jay Dyer as one of the main contributors. For whatever reason, they have Jay Dyer in there. And, for those that don't know, Jay Dyer is an Orthodox heretic and schismatic, which, just on that level alone, I'm not trying to say you can't ever have a heretic in a video, But the issue in this particular case is they are talking again about, the essence of a woman, the role of a Catholic man, Catholic husband, sacrament of matrimony. And Jay Dyer, his own sect, upholds ideas like divorce and remarriage, artificial contraception. It has a whole host of errors when it comes to the sinlessness of our Blessed Mother. So how do you get somebody like that who believes in divorce, remarriage, and contraception, at least their sect does, and then use them as one of your experts in a documentary about marriage and feminism and patriarchy and all these types of things, what a woman should be and what a man should be? And, that to me was one of the weirdest issues I came across, was seeing Jay Dyer's involvement in it, right? I mean, that hit me tremendously. But what we can do actually, just to get things kickstarted, what I'd like to do first is I want to show a quick clip, and this is from the one and only Archbishop Fulton Sheen, a man that I love and has always inspired me. And he has a really great quote he gives about womanhood that I think is worth all of us seeing for this podcast. Let me go ahead and pull that up here right now.
Any civilization is the level of its womanhood, because when man loves a woman, he has to be worthy of her. The higher she is in virtue, in nobility of character, truth and justice and goodness, the more a man has to aspire to be worthy of her.
I really love that phrase, the more that a man has to aspire to be worthy of her. I think that's very important, and that's really one of our core messages, is that men have to do much more in regards to sanctity when it comes to, inspiring their women and being chivalrous. That's why we said you can't just advocate patriarchy, but it has to be a holy, virtuous, chivalrous patriarchy. And you can't just place the blame on the women, which a lot of Gord's material leads to, which we were talking about that in part 1. But men have to be challenged to much higher, and to be raised to a much higher standard, which is some of the stuff we're going to get into in this episode too. But one of the things Jesse and I have talked about since part 1 that struck out to me was that an overreaction to an evil like feminism, right? Because feminism is a legitimate evil, but overreacting to a legitimate evil can lead to other errors as well, such as, in a sense, like a hatred of women, or like a misconstrued view or a degrading view of a woman, her purpose, her role, and, as they say in the documentary, her essence, right? And this is what Gordon does, mixed in the half-truths with the lies. And something that you mentioned to me, Jesse, in our conversation stuck out to me was you had said that people like Gordon, for example, in his approach to how he presents the information, it's basically like telling men that you can have all the fetishes you want, all the control you want, but with minimal to no discussion of virtue whatsoever, and that to me is very, very telling and troubling. That's what you and I saw a lot of from his material. We noticed that there was a video with him and his wife Stephanie where they basically were laughing and scoffing at St. Joseph and Our Lady as models for the married life, saying, well, which of you is St. Joseph, or which of you had a virgin birth? And the issue with that's that the church has always taught that the Holy Family ought to be the primary models for every family, right? One thing you said, Jesse, that I admired was you said that, we don't mirror them in their virginity, but we're supposed to model them in their chastity.
Right.
So you can't just laugh and scoff the Holy Family so simply and just push it aside.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. That was something they did. And that was some of those first clips we saw in the first episode we did. Which is a big deal, because the Holy Family and the saints who model self-sacrifice and genuine love, that's worth talking about. That's worth spending, hours talking about online, is, virtuous things. If you're going to be publicly talking about these things, which, even there's sort of a question there, which we've already discussed, that, should these things even be being discussed by a husband and wife, or two husbands? The things that are allowed and aren't allowed, getting into the sort of explicit details, should that even be happening? Probably not. And then, let alone when it does happen, and really, again, just all really a lot of the content that you might see from Timothy, it doesn't, there's not a big emphasis being placed on virtue and saintliness and whatever. Basically, what are we aspiring to? There's really nothing to aspire to other than maybe for the woman, she has to put in a lot of work to be,
Yeah.
all these things, because these are some of the preferences or whatever that they've decided to say, like, women need to do these things. Some of them are genuine, and then some are the preferences. So apparently women have to work really hard to aspire to something. Men just kind of have to be in charge and get what they want, and that's it's just very reductive, obviously. So
Yeah.
that's what we're dealing with. There's, it's this, these episodes really aren't about attacking the person, but like any correction that's worth sort of doing well, you have to try to correct the error itself. So this is not about Timothy, even though it's tricky, because it's like, um, the only reason we're doing this is because you have this guy with this public account that's saying these things, and on one hand he's trying to do something really important, which is to push back against the evils of feminism, and to try to hold up, masculine, Catholic patriarchy. And because in a certain sense it is the true antidote, it is an antidote to that evil, but not the way that he's characterizing it, without much emphasis on virtue. And then, like you said, kind of laughing and making a joke out of the idea of, like, what are you trying to imitate, Saint Joseph or the Blessed Virgin Mary, you know, mocking that idea because we're not virgins, Well, we don't, that's the whole point of that, saying that is like, we're not virgin, but the church has always given us these as our models to imitate within the confines of holy matrimony. And um unlike Timothy Gordon and this Noland guy who's in this video that we're going to be looking at tonight, I don't think they put forward anything anything that is that requires really self-denial for men. It
Yeah.
mostly offers us indulgence and sort of pleasure and self-seeking. It's a little bit more work for women, but for men it's just it's kind of appealing in the sense that it's just more goodies, more fun times. So
Yeah, and we recall that at the dawn of the 20th century, Pope Leo the 13th had that vision where Satan was basically asking for the 20th century to be handed to him to attack. And then you go mid 20th century, and Sister Lucia of Fatima says that Our Lady tells her the devil's going to wage a battle against marriage and the family. And this is what we see happening, and like I've been saying too, the heart of that attack is against men. And that's how you're going to attack marriages. But especially the idea of like having the idea that as long as there is procreation involved in the marital act, then almost everything goes, everything's permissible. It's a view that's very much rooted in lust, and lust is the downfall of men. That's the whole Masculinity Crisis series is all about exposing that. When I say know your enemy, it's all about the vice of lust. And this is the heart of the battle that we're in, and you're basically giving men the freedom to say it's okay to go ahead and lust as much as you want as long as you're married, right? And that's totally fine to do, which we're going to get a lot into as well with these video clips. But just to really highlight that point, that this is the devil's attack. This is what Our Lady said was going to happen. And the reality being is that women cannot be submissive to a man who is refusing to be like Christ in his marriage, because we have to love our wives as Christ loved the church. And to do that, you can't bring lust into it. There's no room for lust in the sacrament of matrimony. Lust is a vice and a grave sin. And lust, Our Lady of Fatima told Jacinta, is what's leading souls to hell like snowflakes, fall to the ground. So these are very important things. But, with all that in mind, let's actually show one of these clips here, and then we can kind of get going on the our thoughts in the commentary. But let me go ahead and pull this one up first, Jesse, and then we'll get your thoughts on this.
The church, our magisterium, has never, that is not once, laid down an official code of sexual ethics for married people. Not one. It's an empty set. There are a few implications from this, but I get asked all the time, and I know you do too, Will, what are we allowed to do in the bedroom? I'm not a perv, but I want to make sure that what I'm doing is up to snuff in both senses. morally, and of course, we don't want to let things get out of hand, but we also want to do what we can, keep things fresh. We want to make sure that the little we have done is okay.
So the church has no code of ethics, according to Timothy Gordon in that video on Will Noland. All right, what say you, brother? What does the church say about this?
Well, yeah, his exact wording is the magisterium has never laid down an official code of sexual ethics for married people. I think it's a misleading thing to say, because if you're being really, really technical, he's correct. If you're saying the magisterium has never laid down an official code of sexual ethics, like type in that word, is there an encyclical called code of sexual ethics where it has like a list, a checklist, sort of thing. No, that doesn't exist. But has the magisterium ever spoken infallibly or non-infallibly about sexual ethics? Absolutely it has. So in a certain sense, if you're wanting to be really technical, which maybe he was trying to be technical and also ambiguous at the same time, so he could kind of make the point he wanted to make in this in the beginning of this video. This is what he leads with, So he sort of sets it up like, well, since the church hasn't said anything, and it's just a few church fathers, which, get into that in a second. He starts with Augustine, but like, you're claiming that the magisterium has said nothing essentially on marital ethics, and that's false. The Catholic Church actually does have clear moral teachings on marital chastity, natural law, and the primary and secondary ends of marriage and the marital act. Just to name a few would be, in the past century would be Cassi Connubii from Pius XI and Humani Vitae by Paul VI. Also, you can just go to the current catechism of the Catholic Church, and you'll find that actually even that catechism has quite a bit to say about, condemnation of contraception, unnatural acts, and disordered sexual pleasure. So, he gets thumbs down on that one. That's, it's just a misleading thing to say, I guess you would say. And then in truth, the essence of what he's saying is false. The church has, via the magisterium, as well as the church doctors, which I guess we'll probably get into more on the next video, because he brings up Augustine, and he's also dismissive of Augustine. So
Yeah, and especially like you said, the church throughout her history has given, in certain specific documents, clear principles for guidance on, when it comes to this whole topic. So you can't just so easily dismiss it all and say, well, the church has never given us some dogmatic definition. Here's the 10 points of what you can and can't do. But there are clear principles in the ordinary magisterium of the church that have followed throughout our tradition. And Timothy Gordon is pro-Vatican II, and Paul VI, Humani Vitae, that's, there you go. That's the Pope of Vatican II. And he had things to say about it there, but a natural acts is something that the church has spoken very clearly about. Disordered sexual pleasure, something the church has spoken very clearly about. So it's not as simple, again, as writing it off and saying, well, we found some 20th century moral theologians who say this. And especially, like I said at the beginning, when those theologians become the foundation for theology of the body, which has all sorts of errors, mixed in with it. So just some things that people have to keep in mind. But yeah, let's go actually to that second point, because that's really going to be an important one. Let me go ahead and pull this video up to give you guys some context regarding the claim with St. Augustine. Here it is.
There seems to be, as we'll trace in a minute, we'll begin this, but I think a few clarifying remarks help. There seems to be, as you look at the beginning of the church, and especially St. Augustine's statements on this, which kind of kick off the tradition. There are people that talk about marital sex before him, but he's the one that really popularizes a Manichaeist view of sex, that it's dirty, that certain body parts on the human body are fundamentally dirty, not to be spoken of, and that sex between husband and wife, the direct quote is that it's, or the direct paraphrase is that it's evil in any instance, even virtual intent notwithstanding, where they're not intending to bring about life. This means if you have 5 kids, you had sex like 5 times. It is, for Augustine, a dirty thing. And this was never the doctrine of the church. This was never something that the church accepted. We'll talk about some other teachers, that great doctors of the church that follow upon Augustine. His Manichaeism, which he was actually a Manichaeist, they believed the body is evil. The soul is good, but the body is evil. Not Catholic. Very, very un-Catholic. And he got most of this body hatred out of his system by the time that St. Ambrose converted him. But I don't think he got it out of his system when it came to sexual teaching. And I think that this kicks things off in the tradition of the first 1,500 years, because St. Thomas will always try to cover for St. Augustine where he can. That might not be exactly what happened, but it happens to some extent all the time when we read St. Thomas. And I think it's just Manichaeism. What do you say? It was the...
Okay, so I actually I have a few thoughts on this, but
Okay.
it's just interesting to me that one thing, that this is a smaller thing, but he says, here's a direct quote from Augustine, and then he says, well, actually it's a direct paraphrase from St. Augustine. So which is funny to hear, a direct paraphrase.
Yes.
And the thing that I want to let people know is, this is important for me again to emphasize, and we try emphasizing this in part one, but I want people to really understand this. The goal of what we're doing here, we're not trying to bash Timothy Gordon as a person or Will Noland as a person. We are trying to charitably but firmly critique ideas they're holding that are harmful to men, harmful to women on a spiritual level, psychological level, emotional level, that go against the tradition of the church and dismiss doctors and saints of the church like very quickly. We're trying to correct that again for the purposes of the end goal, which we mentioned at the beginning, which was a holy, virtuous, chivalrous patriarchy. Patriarchy is good, but it has to be holy and virtuous, right? We have to keep them accountable to keep that bar high. You can't deviate, even by 5%. And our goal out of this would be, ideally, in a true, genuine way, for them to be challenged or sharpened to say, maybe we need to rethink our presentation on this and what we're saying and what we're teaching people. And, to do a 180 on these topics, because they're not good. But this was something I caught from our first video, actually, and I mentioned it in part one, how quickly they, like this, dismissed St. Augustine, St. Thomas, St. John Chrysostom, St. Alphonsus Liguori. It all goes out the window, with St. Augustine being the first one mentioned, which is just, well, he used to be a Manichaeist, and when he converted, he couldn't really let go of all the Manichaeism on the topic of sexual ethics. It was still there, and St. Thomas was just defending him. It's so easily said. And I had, people like to make the point of saying, well, St. Augustine isn't infallible, right? He's not infallible. And here's the point. It's not that he, on his own merit, individually has to be infallible. What he represents is an ongoing tradition that Gordon himself admitted in the video that goes before Augustine, because he also criticized St. John Chrysostom. They say that his views on this were incorrect. It goes after St. Augustine. And again, it's right in line with the ordinary magisterium throughout tradition in the church in regards to this topic, right? This is the part that's ignored, is that it's not a matter of St. Augustine by himself. St. Augustine represents the thinking of the church in conjunction with everyone that came before him and after him on this topic as a in a consistency, you see. And they dismiss it because of a handful of 20th century moral theologians. The 20th century, by the way, which was the one the devil's attacking. And he's coming after the church, he's coming after marriages, coming after families. This is the whole thing, you see. So anyways, yeah, what are your thoughts on this, Jesse?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts, but I mean, you covered it good as well. It's clear, if you know anything about Augustine, that he firmly opposed Manichaeism. Yeah, once he converted, he wrote even great works against the Manichaeans. He affirmed the holiness of sex within marriage when it was rightly ordered, and he had a lot to say about that. He knew a little bit about that, So you might even say he was probably a perverted. Well, he was, right? He was a perverted man before he became a zealous, Catholic who learned about self-denial and became one of the greatest, church doctors and saints. But yeah, exactly as Timothy sort of started to say there at the beginning, is that this is sort of, in a certain sense, the beginning of the church's moral traditions on these things. Not that it started with him, but in a certain sense it did. And that's actually true. That's actually correct, right? He you have a lot that sort of you can be traced back to St. Augustine, and it's fascinating. Yeah, like one of the comments here, said, imagine thinking that St. Thomas is covering for St. Augustine rather than Tim being wrong. I do think that most likely the latter is true, right? St. Thomas is not covering for St. Augustine, but he understands what Augustine is saying, and he's agreeing with Augustine. And so you have a sort of consensus as you get through with the early fathers, and you read Chrysostom, and you read Augustine, and you read Aquinas, and yeah, there's not there's a consistency there. So yeah, this is Manichaean's view. So the other thing he's made a reference to, saying that Augustine viewed sex as dirty, that he saw certain parts of the human body as dirty and not to be talked about. And it's kind of a funny thing, almost like it's worth actually kind of discussing a little bit. Are there parts of the body that we shouldn't really discuss openly and with with people? Yes, there are. So in a certain sense, yeah, Augustine's right. Even if he was thinking that certain parts of the body are dirty, what does he mean? He doesn't mean that they're like evil, or there's you should castrate yourself or something like that, so that you don't have these body parts that are evil and you should get rid of them. That's like obviously not what's happening there. But obviously there are certain things that are not, you don't talk about and just openly, and maybe he needs to learn about that, because I mean that's the whole point too with this episode that they're going through. They're going into all these dirty things, and some of it is dirty, right? It's not all of it's dirty, because they're trying to talk about a holy thing, but then they're bringing in all of these unnatural acts, and they're talking about them, and trying to say that a lot of these things are permissible. And that's I guess kind of the irony of that particular this particular video that they put out. But yeah, Augustine opposed Manichaeanism. He spoke in numerous places about the holiness of the marital act, not just in the procreative aspect, but actually also in the pleasure that is associated with the marital act, that in and of itself, he pretty sure Augustine even says in and of itself it can be tolerated, but that it inclines the souls towards vice, and that there's a disorder there. If it becomes isolated as its own thing, it doesn't and especially if it doesn't lead to life, then it leads to something else. It leads towards vice and towards the ruin of marriage and the perversion of the marital act and the marriage itself. So that Augustine, you go read some of the stuff he says, and you don't find a man who's confused about sex being like some evil thing or something like that. That's just not, you're not going to find that. Not in the way they're characterizing it. You'll find someone who understands the holiness, the sacredness, and really the rightly ordered purpose of the marital act within holy matrimony.
Yeah, I agree. And again, St. Augustine is one voice among many within the church, and it's so quickly dismissed. And for them to first make the accusation that St. Augustine couldn't let go of aspects of the Manichaean heresy, and then to say, oh, well, with St. Thomas Aquinas, he was just defending St. Augustine, making excuses for him, and throwing basically all the fathers and all the doctors under that same umbrella, essentially. Also, they can justify what they're wanting to put forward as, well, we're saying that this is okay within marriage, because here's these handful of theologians here from the 20th century that say different. You see, and I mentioned this in part one, the hypocrisy of it, or the circular reasoning of it, is that in some areas they will use Aquinas to their benefit, right? And they will say, you can't deviate from him. He's the doctor of doctors. He's the greatest doctor in the church. You can't just go against what Aquinas says. But then in other
Mm.
cases, when it doesn't suit their
Mhm.
agenda or their purposes, well,
Right.
he's just making excuses for St. Augustine because St. Augustine couldn't let go of his heresies. And like you said, St. Augustine, after his conversion, strongly denounced the Manichaeist heresy, right? And talked about, like you mentioned, the goodness of marital intimacy ordered towards procreation. And his issue was condemning lust within marriage, right? Not marital relations themselves. That's the whole thing.
Right.
And
Right.
I mentioned this in my Catholic Masculinity Crisis series, the very first video I did on that, on part 1, the introduction. I said there's a quote from John Paul II that always resonated with me, and which again is ironic because Timothy Gordon, you can tell, is borrowing a lot from theology of the body and the lay experts of theology of the body. But one thing John Paul II said once, and I admired, was he said, "You've heard it said by our Lord, men, if you look at women with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart." And then John Paul II said to husbands, he said, "But I say to you, husbands, if you look at your wives with lust, you've committed adultery in your heart." I remember hearing that years ago and thinking, wow, I never thought about that. Why would that be adultery in the heart? Because we're married, right? It should be fine within marriage. I didn't know any different when I got married. Why would he say such a thing? And what he went on to talk about was that because you have to understand what lust actually is. Lust is a capital vice for a reason that degrades, right, a woman of her worth and makes her basically a creature subject at the whim of your pleasure and your selfishness and nothing more. That's what lust is. And he said, husbands, what husband would want to do that to their wife whom they're bonded to as one flesh, their path to heaven? Why would you do that to your wife? And I thought, wow, it to me was mind-blowing. I had never thought of it from that perspective. So even he affirmed the issue with lust within marriage. And Gordon and Nolan's presentation, and and even like the ones that Gordon did with his wife Stephanie and all that, but are trying to basically vindicate the idea that this is perfectly fine. Go ahead and lust all you want in marriage, in a sense, is what they're trying to vindicate. It's healthy within marriage. Maybe before you're married, it's not good, but now that you're married, you have a wife, great. Go ahead and do what you got to do and have fun with it. But even John Paul II talked about that as being the root issue, that lust will do something to the mind of a man that's not good. It'll seep in many different ways, like a poison again. And I've told people, if you think being married will get rid of all your issues with lust, I said, no, that vice will follow you right within marriage. It'll follow you right into it.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be squashed at the root because it's
Right.
a capital sin for a reason. This is the whole, again, the beauty and the value of, the primary ends of marriage being procreation, connected to the secondary ends and the virtues of chastity and self-control and all these things. One thing also that John Paul II once said that I always admired, that hit me, was he said the problem with pornography is not that it shows too much, but that it shows too little. Because in pornography, all you get is the flesh, but you don't get the heart and the soul and the substance of a person's worth. So again, that's the issues that St. Augustine is condemning the idea of lust, because lust is a vice. It doesn't become magically good now that you're married. He's condemning lust in any context within marriage, and that has been the tradition of the church. We're not going to say, greed is bad, but when you own your own business, greed is perfectly fine. It doesn't work that way. There's still ethics to follow. And now this leads to the next video I want to show, and I found this interesting. This is Gordon's claim then that what we're seeing in the 20th century is what he calls a development of doctrine on this topic. So you have the fathers and the saints and the doctors and the popes all saying one thing, but 20th century, the doctrine somehow magically develops. So let me go ahead and pull this up. Give me 1 second. Here we go.
Today's show, Will, you take it off from here, is going to be a set of parameters, which will be preceded by a look at the historical majority positions in the church, because there has been, I'm going to say a scary word here, even though it shouldn't be, legitimate development of doctrine. So first we're going to talk about that legitimate development of doctrine where there's been really no official teaching by the church. And then after that, we're going to go on and we're going to say, here in our majority of moral theologian by opinion day, here's what the parameters seem to be. And as always, we would request the magisterium clarify this topic. This is
okay. So I have comments, but I'm actually let me defer to you first. What's your takeaway from that, Jesse?
Oh, well, um, obviously this is another one where it's kind of a mixed bag, but in truth, it's kind of just, I mean, you could just reject it outright, I think, because again, he only is able to do this because he's one claiming that the church hasn't given us anything magisterially on sexual ethics, so there's a blank slate there, and St. Augustine, can't trust him, so therefore we can't trust St. Thomas, who also, sort of continued to develop, I guess you could say, the doctrine, because he took Augustine and then he expounded upon the work of Augustine, and he didn't think Augustine was wrong. So but the truth is, like, the development that does genuinely happen, legitimate development of doctrine that happens, is, cannot change from one meaning to a completely different meaning, or especially to a meaning that was once condemned. So if the church, sort of condemned unnatural acts even within marriage, and lust within marriage, and you know defines things related to the natural law, it can't then turn around and teach something completely different or contrary to what it had previously sort of condemned or said was unnatural, or whatever. So no, I don't, this is just more nonsense. It's sort of one of those things where it sort of starts to sound more and more modernist the more you get into it. Um, so, and that's why he's saying, oh, don't be afraid of me saying this, don't be afraid that I'm saying legitimate development of doctrine. This shouldn't be a bad thing. Well, it's so often, n- you know, abused, this term, and this is another example. Like, you
Yeah.
know, you're not doing yourself any favor. You're not doing people a favor who want to talk about development of doctrine in a serious way by then just dismissing Augustine and dismissing Thomas Aquinas and saying that the magisterium has never said a peep about this. Boy, I wish they'd say something. It's just a load of nonsense, and it should be rejected outright. The church, so then if you're saying, well, yeah, they're not saying anything, but there's a legitimate development of doctrine, then you're saying two different things. You're saying that now the church has some different teaching on it, different from Augustine, different from Aquinas, different from Casti Connubii. Which, by the way, if you look at the footnotes in Casti Connubii, who is Pius XI, quoting a lot of course, all the magisterium quotes Augustine and Aquinas on things like this. So, so um, you know, yeah. So additionally, what I would say too is that, and I just thought of this, was be say, St. Thomas Aquinas, Leo the 13th said that if the church has been silent on something, then we should defer to the angelic doctor on matters related to moral teachings and such. So another reason to just go back, long before Timothy Gordon, tried to explain the development of doctrine and, um, the new exciting things that you can do in the bedroom. Um, there was consistent teaching that actually came from the magisterium and the moral doctors and theologians of the church.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. And one of my main issues being is that development is just that. It's an organic development. What it's not is mutation. And what Gordon and Nolan are talking about is legit mutation. We used to think this, but now we're going to do a complete facelift and say something different. It's not how development of doctrine works. Development of doctrine works in the sense of, for example, when you go to the primitive early martyr church, we're talking first, 2-3 centuries, right? You will find the fathers talking about there's one God, there's three persons, right? Father is God, the Son is God, Holy Ghost is God. They'll start using the word Trinity by the late 2nd century, the word Trinity. Now, they might have not had the full-blown understanding what the Trinity is or how that all works. How do you have three persons in one God? But they had the nuts and bolts there. They had the truth there. Then you get to the 5th and 6th centuries, and now you have creedal definitions, right? The God from God, life from life, true God from true God, begotten, not made, consubstantial of the Father. I believe in the Holy Ghost, the Lord, the giver of life, proceeds from the Father and the Son. All these different things. That's legitimate development, right? That is reflection on truth and applying principles over time that give better sense to the doctrines we believe. Okay.
Mhm.
I've talked about this a lot in regards to Eucharistic theology, in regards to the atonement, and you'll find this a lot even in the Marian dogmas, right? The earliest fathers, what do they say about the Blessed Mother? She's the new Eve. They talk about her being spotless, all pure.
Mm.
You start hearing the word sinless. They're not going around quoting, the Immaculate Conception dogmatic definition, but you can tell the seeds are there, and that's what's being believed. Nowadays, you fast forward modern day, we have the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, with a full-blown Mariology on it. That's legitimate development. But development doesn't work when you have the fathers, the saints, and the doctors, and the popes all saying one thing, right, in regards to marital ethics, okay, in regards to intimacy in the marital act. And then the 20th century, you start seeing completely like a complete 180 on it and saying, well, this is just developments, what's happening here. And I think that's what he's trying to do. And too many people jump at it because it justifies certain vices or certain struggles with vices, possibly. And that's why they jump at it. And now all of a sudden, we don't have to listen to the warnings, the dire warnings on this very topic of St. Alphonsus Liguori, who talked about his mortal sin that will lead you to hell. We don't have to worry about what St. Augustine said because he's just, attached to Manichaeist heresies probably and thinks it's dirty. We can ignore St. Thomas Aquinas on that particular topic because he's just defending Augustine. We can ignore St. John Chrysostom. All these things just fly out, you see, because of the 20th century, because theologians had a change of turn on it. So that's my issue on that. And the other thing, too, being is that when they say, we wish the church would say something, or the church one day, and it's something you've touched on. And the thing I just want to clarify that it's so important. We may not have, right, a dogmatic definition, again, of here's the 10 points, which you normally don't get on topics of morality anyways. You get that on topics of faith typically. But what we do, it may not be dogmatic definition, but what we do have are magisterial teachings at the ordinary magisterial level, consistent with tradition. So when you say, I wish the church would say something, on a magisterial level, the church has that we can be bound to because it connects to the fathers and to the doctors, right? It all flows together. And, there is no dogmatic definition, for example, in regards to abortion, right? Even though we know it's a grave evil, and it's magisterial that it's a grave evil. And if someone came out and said, well, in the 20th century, we've just kind of done an about turn on what we think about it, that wouldn't fly. You see, it wouldn't work that way. So that's the distinction that I think is important to be made. But yeah, so
yeah. No, I was just going to say there are specific things, and I don't know if they would qualify as even infallible. They probably some of them would as infallible, as coming from the magisterium, though not in a dogmatic way. For instance, that marriage is primary. The primary end of marriage is procreation. That is church teaching officially. That comes from the magisterium. So to dismiss it as if there's nothing is very misleading, because we know that specific thing comes from the magisterium. It's been taught by the church with the weight of its ordinary magisterium, and so therefore it's church teaching. You cannot go against it. And I know that they gave lip service to that, so of course they have to give lip service to it. And I say that they gave lip service because they mentioned it, but then they still go on to claim that all sorts of other unnatural acts are okay as long as you end with a procreative act, kind of as like checking it off the list. You have to make sure you do that, and then everything else goes. Everything else in the bedroom goes. And that gets into another issue where there are documents that speak, again, non-infallible magisterial documents, which come from specifically, I think of one of Pius XII, about unnatural sexual acts are intrinsically immoral. So it doesn't matter if you want to claim that, well, we use these unnatural sexual acts, which they just do speak about a little bit in this video, but as long as you finish with a procreative act, you're all good. And this would be a sort of perversion, a sort of distortion of the fact that the church has actually spoken somewhat clearly about this, but it seems that it's not clear enough, right, for people who want to do what they want to do. So those are a couple things that the church has taught. Sexual pleasure is not evil. I don't think the church has ever taught that. I don't think even Augustine and all of these other moral theologians ever taught that sexual pleasure is evil. but that it always should be ordered to, right, to reason and virtue and to procreative ends. And so the moral, the thing about this, the marital act that makes it moral and good is the procreative intent involved, and not just not just kind of having that as an afterthought, like a check it off the list, so that you can do all the other stuff you really want to do. That's a perverted way of thinking about it. That's not a holy way to think about marriage. And so I think that's where Timothy, is very, they went off track with this whole episode, really. They started off track. They claim there's no magisterium. They start attacking Augustine, and then they spend the whole time talking about various things. Some of their comments are true, but a lot of it's a distorted overemphasis on all the things that are permissible,
Yeah.
so long as you check this one thing off the list. And it's just a perverted kind of view of the marital act, fortunately.
Yeah, and like we said, I mean, that is the very definition of subversion, is to have something that
Mhm.
is objectively true, but mix in some
Mhm.
lies and falsities within it.
Right.
And here's the thing, yeah, this topic itself, I mean, this is, I hope I say this so people can understand. It's not something you can just be 50-50 maybe on type thing. Okay,
Mhm.
that's important to know. They are giving just, a full freedom and a whole host of things that you're able to do within the marital act. It's totally fine and it's healthy and it's good and it keeps things fresh and exciting and all this type of stuff. That things that, again, now we're just condemned by St. Augustine and St. Thomas, but like I mentioned, St. Alphonsus Liguori, saying that certain things are explicitly, gravely sinful, even within the context of marriage. And this is important. So again, Our Lady of Fatima said, souls
Mhm.
fall to hell like snowflakes, and the primary reason why, sins of the flesh. If you enter into marriage thinking, well, now that I'm married, I have freedom to do X, Y, and Z without any type of spiritual repercussion, that's perfectly fine because some lay person on a YouTube live told you it was fine. We have to answer to God for
Mhm.
certain things. And if we want to grow in the path of virtue, the narrow path of sanctity, we have to know the foundation we're standing on when it comes to the virtues. That's the important thing.
Mhm.
So yeah, we can't be 50-50, maybe, I don't know. It doesn't work that way in these things. These are serious issues. This is what we were
Mhm.
saying in our part one video. We at first were like, maybe we shouldn't show any clips from this video with Will Nolan, because there was just a lot of scandalous things said. And I was able to find, like, as you're seeing, certain videos that barely miss the the scandal.
Mhm.
But the scandal itself, even like I said before, even the idea of them coming on saying, we're going to give you advice in regards to the marital act, in regards to intimacy, and the church hasn't really said anything about it, so we're just going to give you our best thought on it based on what we think this says over here, and you're good to go. And people run with this like it's perfectly fine,
Mhm.
and that's why I said I've had to work and trying to deprogram lots of guys that are struggling with certain vices in their marriages and their relationships, all sorts of things, even in courtships. And it's like,
Mhm.
they don't know why certain vices are so hard to let go of. And I tell them, because if you give an
Mhm.
inch to a tool of the devil, he'll take a mile every single time.
Right.
And
Right.
lust is a tool of the devil. It can't be ordered in a nice way in the context of marriage. It doesn't work that way, you see.
Mhm.
So that's really the destructive part about this particular video with Gordon and Nolan, is that there are certain things I told people before, you really shouldn't watch their video, because certain things are said that are overtly scandalous to listen to, But going to that claim, so they say that I'm gonna show the clip, but they basically claim it's almost
Mhm.
impossible to lust after your wife. They're saying this in the context of, it's impossible to do because basically, once you're married, you have freedom to lust to a really large degree and not worry about it becoming sinful. Okay. Let me go ahead and actually get this clip up so people get the context of it, and then let me get your comments on it.
That's spot on, Tim. And what were some of the consequences of this? Well, as you said, it wasn't that St. Augustine was the first person to have this particular attitude. St. John Chrysostom, for example, said that basically the sexual use of marriage is a post-lapsarian phenomenon. So you get sex associated with the fall and therefore sin. And St. Augustine took this idea and reached a few conclusions, as you've already outlined. But sex is fundamentally for him a kind of disease that can't be part of the good of marriage at all. It's only purified when made use of for propagation. And this meant that, for example, a man couldn't have sex with his pregnant wife. Any use of sex to fight temptation, to fight fornication, was also not allowed. And sterile people couldn't have sex. Now, you can see straight away, just from dealing with some of those historical attitudes, how important this is for people to talk about today. I've been asked, is it okay to have sex with my wife when she's pregnant? I'm sure you've had that question as well.
Of course.
These are some of the things that are burning questions in the minds of Catholics today.
Absolutely. I get asked all the time. Oops, I accidentally did this. Oops, I think I lusted after my wife. Almost impossible to do, given what the 8 or 9 moralists of the early 20th century teach today. You will see that it's almost impossible to lust after your wife.
Okay. So yeah, there's a lot there too, and I just want to make a note of the fact what I said earlier. They mentioned St. John Chrysostom there, right? Just as I said, and they bring him in too, saying, well, Augustine, they say St. Augustine's the first. Like, well, really he wasn't, because St. John before him also said it. But again, it just gets dismissed very clearly because of why? Because of moral theologians in the 20th century are now saying different. Again, I want to make this connection clear. What is the devil's attack in the 20th century? It's marriage and the family. What he's going after. In the heart of that, he's going after men. You know, the devil loves nothing more than to give you something that looks, again, 95, 96% true, but has a little poison mixed in that can then leak into the rest, right? Patriarchy being a good thing, but if it's not virtuous and not in line with Catholic moral principles, it will corrupt the soul. Then it wouldn't be a good thing. What are your thoughts on that clip there, Jesse?
Well, the note I have here would be just primarily with this, claim that it's impossible to lust after your wife, or that it's almost impossible, he said, to lust after your wife. It reminds me of the recent interview. I don't want to try to go into it too much because it was a long interview or whatever, but with Matt Fradd and Dennis Prager. Obviously that was a fun interview for different reasons, but Prager just kept coming off more and more as sort of this kind of pervert who kept insisting that the bedroom itself was a space for the unholy, and a lot of strange things, but also essentially had the view that anything is permissible as long as the two agree on it. And of course, that's not Catholic teaching, but that's sort of what's, what this, a lot of the dialogue in this video reminds me of. But in particular, we do know you can lust after your wife. It isn't almost impossible. It's probably, you could just as easily say the complete opposite. It's almost impossible not to lust after your wife. Given the way that the hypersexualized sort of pornographic culture that we live in, where people are just conditioned, socially engineered, especially young men, to constantly be thinking about these things, and it's almost impossible not just to be challenged and bombarded with lustful, or provocative images that then tempt man, but if a man is married, that doesn't, like you said earlier, that doesn't, that temptation to lust, to think on things even in a disordered way. It's not impossible. It's not almost impossible. In fact, it's most likely going to continue. Like if you struggled with it before marriage, you'll probably continue to struggle with it. And it's something that can be overcome just through self-denial, self-sacrifice. Sort of, you have custody of the eyes, but custody of the mind, I guess you could say. not allowing yourself to, sort of giving yourself the license. And it sort of seems like that's what a lot of this would be about, is like giving people the license to feel like this is permissible. This is permissible. Now they spend most of the time talking about what is permissible, even though they kind of framed the beginning of the discussion as, genuinely trying to understand what you're not allowed, what you shouldn't do as well. The majority of the conversation is about, well, yeah, you can do that. You can do that. So it's just very permissive approach. And so lust also, in a way, it's like, well, that's kind of impossible to actually lust after your wife.
Yeah.
No, it's not. But
Yeah, and look at Saint Jerome. I showed this in part 1, but I think it's worth repeating for this clip. Saint Jerome says a wise man ought to love his wife with judgment, not with passion. Let a man govern his voluptuous impulses. There is nothing blacker than to love a wife as if she were an adulteress. Okay, and then that's a pretty powerful right there. But then again, here's the doctor of doctors, St. Thomas Aquinas, who said, and since the man who is too ardent a lover of his wife acts counter to the good of marriage if he use her indecently, although he be not unfaithful, he may be called an adulterer. Okay, so there you have, again, 2 eminent doctors of the church saying that. And again, St. Augustine saying that the married must not succumb to excessive passion. Pope St. Gregory the Great calling excessive attachment to pleasure as a vice. And so again, the whole point being is that, and not even going into St. Alphonsus Liguori again, but if you take all of these together and just tell yourself, well, it's just their best opinion, basically, but we can disagree because theology of the body, 20th century says different. This could open up the door for objectively grave sin within the context of the sacrament of matrimony, right? Because it goes against what the church has been telling us, what the saints and the doctor told us, what the popes have told us, right? So this is something that, and again, we have to take it with the utmost seriousness. And again, what worries me a lot is that those that are trying to figure out, well, how far can I go before it's bad? How far can I go before it's a sin? That's not the right way to approach things as a saint or as a husband, right? Because we should be thinking, what more can I do to grow in holiness? How can I become more virtuous? How can I be more like St. Joseph? Or, that should be the mentality. But a lot of people are like, well, we have these impulses, we have these struggles. Like Timothy Gordon said, we talked about this in episode 1, where he said, I just have to blow off some steam. I've had, a long day and I got to blow off steam. And like that whole mentality. So what can I do before it becomes sinful? That's not the way you approach a holy sacrament.
Yeah, I think that phrase has really stuck with me too, from the first episode, where he kind of introduced the idea of, the going into the marital act with that intention of like blowing off steam. I think right away people should be able to recognize there's something wrong with that, because that would be disordered. That's a disordered approach to the marital act. It's not wrong that you had that inclination or that urge, or that, I need to blow off steam. That's not wrong. That's not evil. It's just, it's not ordered to right reason. So if you act on that, and then you sort of just sort of approach it, it degrades the act, and I think this is why the doctors and the moral theologians, warned against lust. It warned against getting these things disordered. It warned against sexual immorality in general, because of the harm that those things do. That's not really loving, and unfortunately, these mischaracterizations of incredible men who wrote beautifully about almost everything, relating to the faith, and especially something so important as marriage. Chrysostom's works are some of the best you'll find, and he's heavily quoted as well by the magisterium. And Chrysostom especially is really something all men should be reading. His homilies and his his homilies on Ephesians, where he's speaking about marriage, because his characterization of St. John Chrysostom is also off. This this characterization from Noland. He taught as well explicitly in his homilies and in his commentaries that marriage serves multiple purposes, that including procreation and the mutual support of the spouses, that that these are the things that make it holy. He emphasized that marital intercourse is actually good, and it should be approached with purity and self-control. And he did these things. He challenged especially men. I think possibly there's a reason why these men are pushing back so hard against saint uh, St Augustine, St Thomas Aquinas, and St John Chrysostom. St Augustine, because he left behind his life of pleasure, um, and Aquinas, he's the angelic doctor. He gets his angelic wisdom because of his pureness of heart. And Chrysostom, who has some of the strongest words for men in terms of how they love like Christ. And I think um, that's what's and again, this is the kind of things that are lacking from these discussions, is like really challenging talks for men on how to grow in holiness and to be more like Christ, and actually you know engage in all things related to marriage, including the marital act, with as much genuine love for their spouse and consideration for their spouse as possible. Otherwise, it's not real holy intercourse in a certain sense. It's and there we should have no scruple about saying that it's not holy in its purest sense unless it's done with genuine love. If it's done it with this flippant attitude, well, I want it, I need it, I'd like it. Those aren't that's not a holy approach
Yeah.
to the marital act. So it just isn't. If you think it is, I mean, that's probably just the result of the perverse time that we live in, that we're not able to distinguish that there's something wrong with that this is a sort of perverted approach to a holy thing.
That's and yes, that is it's a hard truth, but it's true to say it's a perverted approach. This is one of the big concerns obviously we have with this whole approach. And this takes us right back again to what we said at the beginning, that the Catholic standard ought to be. If you're going to promote patriarchy, which is good, it has to be rooted in male responsibility, self-sacrifice, leadership, not self-indulgence. It's also why we've talked about the fact that even self-control itself is a virtue. Chastity, obviously, is where it comes from. That needs to be grounded within the sacrament of marriage. And by the way, I fact checked myself. What Gordon says is it's okay be in the sense of I have to work off some energy. That's the phrase he uses. I have to work off some energy,
Mm-hmm.
and that justifies it, and that the
Mhm.
wife has to be on board with it unless grave reason, which he never defines what grave reason is, other than to
Right.
give the ideas or the examples of you're in a car accident, your legs are falling off. I mean, in other words, really outlandish, extreme types of ideas. Other than that, it's basically a sin, is the way that his presentation comes off. That's the implication of what his presentation is, what him and Nolan seem to talk about. And yeah, this is a huge error, because again, as you just said, and as we were saying, you can't bring these types of vices within the sacrament. The church has been very clear on that. The saints and the doctors are clear on that. So this isn't just like a small detail. That's why I was trying to explain to people the past week. It's not just as simple as, well, we disagree on a few percentage of things. Everything else is good. So might as well just leave it alone. Like, no, you're talking about bringing mortal sin into the context of marriage, which isn't good. This will for sure lead men down a wide path away from virtue.
Right.
Yeah.
I would say too, even if it's not even if what we're talking about is not a mortal sin, if it's a distortion of a holy thing, it's I can't remember who said it, but the perversion of the best is the worst. When you take something that's holy, which the marital act is holy when it is rightly ordered, and you just put the slightest distortion, even if it doesn't rise to the level of a mortal sin for all the various reasons that would have to be there, it still can distort something good and holy and make it less good and less holy. And then over time, that calloused approach to something can lead to mortal sin. It can, and that is the real danger. Not so, and then the mortal sins being who knows what exactly, because um the falling apart of a marriage or whatever, that is the potential. Lust has very destructive power, right? So
Yeah.
so I think even if we're not talking about mortal sin, because that involves various levels of like, you know, um, knowledge and and then intention and all of that, even if it's not that, but if it's just some distortion of a good and holy and wonderful thing, it's still worth trying to get it right, which the church has spoken clearly. To say that it hasn't is the beginning of a whole host of errors, and that's how
Yeah.
this show started, is denying the fact that church is taught on these things.
Yeah. And yeah, definitely. Let me go ahead and pull up this video clip we have. This is another point that's made in the Gordon Nolan video, basically comparing the denial of the marital act to contraception. Let me go ahead and get this one up.
What kinds of acts involved in sex are, of course, not addressed by St. Paul or the Bible. We're going to address that today. But really, denials of any kind are fundamentally prophylactic, are fundamentally like using contraception. In Steph's book, she writes, "Don't be a contraceptive."
Okay. So yeah, I mean, that's a quick clip, but I think that's definitely an important point to address, that they're trying to make this comparison between, denying the marital act for, in a sense, being compared to contraception. Yeah, you had a lot to say about this, brother. What did you want to share?
I mean, there's just a lack of nuance. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, everybody hates that, when you start harping on the lack of nuance, but the lack of nuance, which they discuss at other points in other videos, but nevertheless, like, you can't say something like so firmly as if there's like no getting out of this. And my wife wrote a book about it, and she told people not to be a contraception. Okay, calm down. Denial is not the same as a contraception, which is an intrinsic moral evil. We know that, like, taking them for the reasons that people take contraception, or using contraception for the reason people use them. There's more going on here, but like, if and the other nuance would be for how long, because that's always something too that gets brought up in these discussions, is is this an indefinite denial of the marital debt? Is this an unjust denial of the marital debt? And then what exactly constitutes an unjust denial of the marital debt? Those are all factors that actually mean something. Did she deny you, or he deny you, the marital debt, for 5 minutes? Did you make it through the 5 minutes? Is she in mortal sin that because for 5 minutes, she said, well, just wait a minute, and he did wanted it now, like I don't know. There's just a lot of nuance here. It's like, or was it, she was
he had to
literally
work off
having
energy.
a bad day. She was sick or whatever. Yeah. You had to work off energy, but she was in the middle of something. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, there's just a lot to it. I think the truth is, no, a wife denying just point blank is not immediately mean that she's in mortal sin. There would have to be other, factors that would make that so. The scriptures teach that we should not, I think, defraud each other. That would be like maybe one of the words, like the spouses should not defraud each other. The church allows for these abstinences or whatever, these denials, because for legitimate reasons, and those are worth trying to understand and then talking to your priest. It's like, yeah, I mean, it could be legitimate reasons, which we discussed this quite a bit in the first episode, but yeah.
And St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa, Book 2, says that marital duty must be exercised with virtue and moderation. So all these things, they have to be factored in. And I mean, and it to again emphasize the point, to belabor it, that we made in part 1, that we're making in this one. People that have genuine questions about these types of topics should not be going to Timothy and Will for the answers. And as I said in part 1, and also don't message me and Jesse. Talk to your spiritual director, talk to your priest. That's who you go to. I don't know. how this got to the point of where, you know, there's these lay experts that talk about these types of things and can tell you what's, you know, what's right and what's not. Especially on a topic where, again, the tradition of the church is so clear one way. But if you have genuine questions, go to your priest and talk to him about it. You know, go to your spiritual director. I've told people in the past that, you know, in the past I'd be in Facebook groups, like these type of Catholic type groups, whatever. And people will ask all sorts of deep, you know, personal questions pertaining to their marriage and associated things, asking people like us in the group for the advice on what's right and what's wrong. And I'm the guy that's always telling people, why are you asking us? We're all just lay people like you, learning the faith and growing holiness, you know. But I mean, on those types of topics, go to your priest and talk to them.
Yeah.
That's just
one of the things too, just to be really clear, I think I kind of already said it, but just to be as clear as possible, like contraception is an intrinsic evil. That's from the magisterium. Contraception is an intrinsic evil and it shouldn't be done. But this is partly too because it allows for people to have the act without without its life-giving end, you know. And so there's a huge distinction between a denial, which really is a deferring of the act, you know. So okay, she said you can't she can't right now, or he can't right now. That doesn't mean that they have used a contraception to pervert the act itself and abort the life-giving, you know, aspect of it, to make it truly something more mortally sinful, you know, like gravely evil. So you know, denial is not gravely evil. It could be if it's, you know, prolonged for a long time without any good, you know, with any sufficient kind of reason. And so everyone has to think about those things, and you have to talk to your spouse. You have to talk, you know, and if you have a problem, you need to share that with your spouse. You know, if you're having some problem with them, you know, you need to work it out, whatever it is. Like there's a host of issues here, and yeah, it's like it's not going to be solved by, you know, this couple who's got like their thing, then they tell you everybody's got to do it this way or you're in mortal sin. That's not how it works.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those are two very different things. I mean, don't be confused by this, you know.
Yeah, it's not a good comparison that they make by comparing one to the other. And because so, and you know, the other thing too being is that, like I mentioned, there's a reason why we had to be very limited in what clips we showed from this video, because some of it is so it's profane and vulgar and shouldn't be being discussed in a YouTube public live video. It doesn't belong in that format. They get into all sorts of questions regarding what's permitted and what's not in regards to different types of body parts and different actions and all these things. And not only is it scandalous, but like I said, some of it is just blatantly wrong information. But again, I mean, saints have said would be, you know, sinful within the context of marriage, but they're saying, no, you're perfectly fine to do this because the 20th century theologians have said different now. But, you know, just to belabor the point again that you made, that all acts must be ordered to procreation. It has to be stated, you know, as I mean, very, very clearly so people understand, and that the fathers, the saints, the doctors in unanimity reject unnatural acts, okay, within the context of marriage, even so. And it's not that marriage justifies it. No, it's still rejected even in the context of marriage. That's what people need to know. St. Clement of Alexandria, all acts contrary to nature are condemned, right? St. John Chrysostom, condemning unnatural acts within marriage. So this is part of the patrimony, the testimony of our faith, the tradition of our faith. And you know, that's the troubling part about Timothy Gordon Will Nolan's presentation is it if you were to watch it, which again I'm telling people not to because of the scandal involved, but if you were to watch it, they are giving advice that's a 180 to the saints and doctors and the theologians and the popes and all that type of stuff, and they're giving a position, a platform that basically starts with how far can I go, how much fun can I have until it becomes too much, then I have to pull back just a little. You know, that's not the right way to approach the narrow path. It just isn't, and definitely not the right way to approach the vocation of marriage as a husband. You know, so I mean, those are some of my overriding concerns about it.
Right.
But yeah, anything else you want to say, brother? Because what I actually want to do is get to some of these tweets I got from Nolan. But what are some of the points that are on your mind as of right now?
Yeah, I mean, just general points, and to the point you're just making there, the the church condemning the unnatural acts, which we're not really wanting to talk about. Um,
Mhm.
you know, they do talk about it, so um, they get into a lot of the explicit details, and it's fascinating anyway, right? Because here we actually take seriously what Augustine and Aquinas teach on this stuff, and so we don't really want to go into a lot more detail, but they go into all the detail. And the overall gist of what they're doing is, trying to claim that actually a good deal of unnatural acts are okay. Some of them they say are not. To be fair, they say some of the unnatural acts that they discuss are not correct. Although they're really, I mean, I would say they're kind of soft on it. But the point is, they have some that they say are good and some that they say are not. And this is just not really like the clarity and maybe the intentional lack of detail that the church gives still is, in my understanding, it still shows clearly that, like, we have to, one, it has to be ordered toward procreation. We've gone over that. It has to be in accordance with natural law, which we've gone over that, but I don't know, we haven't talked about it a lot. But it has to be in accordance with natural law, and it has to be respectful of the dignity of both spouses. That's something you do get in the 20th century. You get a lot of talk of the dignity of both spouses, um, and um, and that's consistent with church teaching, even though actually there would always be some distinction, very clear distinction between the man and the woman, but each one having a great deal of dignity must be respected and loved, and within the act, and the acts cannot be degrading to either one of the spouses. And that
Mhm.
is actually what takes place in unnatural acts. Is, I guess you could say, both are being degraded, but both may not seem like it's degrading. But the point is, that's the idea with, if it's unnatural, it's probably degrading in some way, and it shouldn't be done. It has no place. And so anyway, um, you can surmise from, I think, from that
Yeah.
there's a good deal of explicit content in their video that honestly shouldn't even be on, shouldn't be on online. So.
Yeah, and natural law, right? For it forbids acts that deviate from the procreative purpose and end of the
Mhm.
marital act. That's so important to know, and it's so true. Someone asked me a couple after we did our part one. Someone had asked me, well, how come they can't talk about the issue? Meaning they being Gordon and Nolan, but the saints can write about it. And I tell people this is night and day, or apples and oranges. Saints write very often because, one, they're under the oversight of ecclesiastical authority to give, theological moral instruction, right? They write on topics from that end that are then disseminated typically in context to priests, who then disseminate accordingly as needed to husbands for in the context of marriage discussions,
Mhm.
marriage preparation, marriage counseling, and husbands know how to then disseminate accordingly within the context of their marriage. This is not the same thing as doing a public YouTube live video and saying, hey, we're going to teach you all about something. And anyone can watch, 30,000, 50,000 watch you. People can come on and see what we have to say about this. And we're both lay guys talking about it,
Mhm.
night and day, not the same thing. So I really hope people understand that distinction. So I think it's very important to be made. Pope Pius XII, 1951, said that marital relations must be exercised with virtue, not indulgence. One of the things that you and I were talking about in our analysis of this video with Gordon and Nolan, I was talking about this earlier today, that Gordon uses this analogy, and I'll have to paraphrase it, but essentially the idea of, like, the whole thing about going to a store to buy some eggs. He talks about, like, if you're going to the grocery store and the goal is to buy eggs, right? That's the purpose of why you're going. But on the way there, you kind of forget that that's the purpose, but you still go because you have other things that you have to buy. So you go to the store, you get all the stuff that you need. And you also happen to get the eggs, and then you go back home. And essentially what he tries to say is, like, you see in that example, the end was met because you got the eggs. He then compares that to marital acts, or acts within the marriage, the marital act, a natural act, and saying it's basically the same thing. As long as you're not using contraception, you can do all sorts of other things, even if the purpose of the thought isn't towards, in some way, order towards procreation, or it doesn't have to. You don't have to worry about that. It could just be that you're being tempted and need to, work off the energy, or like that kind of mode, and totally fine to do. And so, yeah, again, their presentation then gets into a lot of, so these acts are maybe not good, but these acts are perfectly fine. And it's people have to be very weird of the stuff they say. Yeah.
Yeah, just really reduce again, like this is this callousness, which they want to popularize. This, reducing the moral order of the marital act to just like an afterthought. It's okay if it just sort of becomes this thing that you forgot about, and then I remembered it right at the end, and we got it right. So that means everything's good. We're good. And that's like no, again, I don't know if we're talking about like more mortal sin here, but if this is the way that you treat the marital act, then it's not being treated like the holy thing that it is. It's it's you'd have to come up with a better analogy. Eggs, who cares if you even get the eggs? It's a stupid analogy. It'd have to be something that you absolutely needed, or else you're dead, because it's mortally sinful, right? So like, or a grave matter, if you have a lot of fun at the store and you don't get the eggs, but the eggs are the only thing that was going to keep you from falling into grave sin, then are you going to forget the eggs? Are you going to treat the eggs? Are you going to have this callous attitude? It's I don't know. It's just reductive. It's like reductive way of approaching. It's like, is it supposed to be the most important thing that everything else is subordinated to, or is it just an afterthought that really, is just it's just being trivialized in this in a bad analogy means that you've now trivialized something that is really important. So
and then just so I can clarify too. Yeah, just so I can clarify too. The reason why I bring up the context of mortal sin, because you what you're saying is very spot on, and just so I can clarify that part, what I mean to say is this, just so it's very clear. Like I said earlier, when you give vice an inch, it takes a mile. If you give the devil an inch, it takes a mile, right? If you start trying to incorporate certain vices within the context of marriage, especially as it pertains to sins of the flesh or vices that pertain to lust, right? When you try to give an inch to it, as Thomas à Kempis says in the Imitation of Christ, he says, don't let temptation even get past the threshold of your door. And this is what Venerable Louis Granada has to say in the Spirit in the Sinner's Guide, and Dom Lorenzo Scapoli in the Spiritual Combat, spiritual classics. When it comes to the vice of lust, they say this is the one unique type of vice that can't be wrestled with. You can't allow it entrance whatsoever, right? Whereas the other vices, when they hit you, they give all these advice on what you do. But with lust, they say you don't give it access whatsoever. Flee it like the plague. And so my whole point being is that if you allow lust unrestricted, the way that they often talk about it in the context of marriage, I can run with this in the marriage because it's almost virtually impossible to lust after a wife. If you allow it, it will in time, and I've seen it happen to many husbands, inevitably lead to other pathways, right, that deviate outside the marriage, for example, things that people need to understand. Whereas they're proposing, no, this is a good thing in the context of marriage, right? And it'll make your life happier and more fulfilling. It very often leads men down other pathways that aren't good. And, that's that issue. The other issue being as well, the whole thing about that, the presentation they give very often leads, again, as we said in part one, and now this one, to a view of women that at times can be very degrading. It can be very perverse at face value, but it's degrading and dehumanizing, and how it views the purpose, or as they say, the essence of a woman, right? And that can lead to things in the context of marriage that, again, aren't good, and that can be mortally sinful. For example, if there are legitimate reasons, not just a woman, getting hit by a bus or her legs falling off, but legitimate reasons why now is not a good time, and you're saying, I don't care what you say, this is happening because I'm the husband, and that kind of approach is not good. And like I've said, I've talked to guys that are in marriages with that idea, because I'm not going to say because of Gordon and Nolan's explicit, but because of ideas like this that they present, you see, and that's not a good thing, So that's what I mean is, like, this is where it can become very dangerous and tricky, and we have to have our guard up because, again, as I've said now many times, the battle is against marriage and the family. the battles against is specifically against men. The number one reason why souls go to hell, Our Lady said in 1917, sins of the flesh. So we have to be very guarded on these things, especially in the context of marriage, where husbands are called to be leaders and protectors and providers of their one flesh union, of their families. You see,
Right.
that's the important thing. So the fathers are all unanimous when it comes to unnatural acts and that type of mentality. St. Jerome, St. Augustine, St. Basil the Great, St. John Chrysostom, saying that these things don't belong within marriage. This is the whole thing that we have to weigh in. You know, when someone says, well, here's a handful of theologians, 20th century, that think this, you know, that's what has to be weighed in. You can't just dismiss it so easily.
Right.
Having said that, let me go ahead and get to these really quick. These are some of the things I came across going through Nolan's social media that I found troubling, and I thought I'd bring it up here in the because we are discussing Gordon and Nolan's video together, basically. I thought it's worth bringing up, though. So here you have Nolan. He's responding to Lila Rose, right? So you see Lila Rose on the bottom saying sexual compatibility, in quotes, is a myth. Great sex is achieved through mutual love, commitment, emotional intimacy, and practice. Nolan says no. To take just one example, women are more attracted to men with MHC alleles different from their own to produce children with a stronger immune system. And there are plenty of other examples I'm sure you can easily imagine. We are rational animals, yes, but we are still animals. Unlike animal copulation, human procreation has a spiritual aspect, but its animal aspect can't be ignored. Grace builds on nature. The part that troubles me with this, remember in part one, we talked about the tweets where he compared women to dogs, right? And now we're looking at this, they're basically saying, you know, no, we are at the core, we're still animals, right? We're spiritual, but we can't ignore the animal aspect within us. And this goes back to something that you and I were wondering about when we first encountered the original trailer to Tim Gordon's documentary, was saying that it's a very, not just a temporal view of women, but a very surface view, very empty view, but also like a very carnal type view, very animalistic in its idea of the marital act and of women and the purpose of women in the context of marriage, that it tends to that direction. It's very Darwinian in a lot of ways and how it's presented. So Nolan making this point about we are rational animals, and I would correct that by saying, well, we're rational creatures, right? But Scripture itself tells us, the faith tells us that we were created higher than the beasts. Okay, the animals are beasts, and yes, they are, you know, they act on instinct, but we are not evolved from animals, right? Which I would imagine Nolan and Gordon agree with. I don't know their view on that specific topic, but the idea though that they try to give here, I think, goes to that idea of like, well, men just have their needs, you know, they have to again work off the energy. We're rational animals at the end of the day. We're spiritual, but we have you can't ignore the animal aspect. And I think that this kind of underlies a deeper issue in the idea of what, again, of the goal of what it means to be a man or a husband, and the way a man will view a woman in the context of marriage. You see, so those are some of the troubling things for me. Anything you had on that, brother, that comes to mind?
Well, I mean, there's probably, there's all sorts of little things. I think even if you don't get hung up on the word animal and you just, you take that to mean, creature, or, in a certain sense, we're an animal. There's still some weird things going on here. I think if you try to justify sexual behavior based on animal instincts, where does it stop? Obviously, he uses the word we're a rational animal, but even that is a kind of naturalistic, maybe even materialistic, naturalistic way of speaking. It's not like really, I don't know. It doesn't sound like it's in line with the way that Catholic thought would just challenge us to subordinate our instincts, our passions, our lower passions, to right reason. And this is what we're talking about again with this whole thing, with the principal ends of marriage and the secondary ends of marriage. The secondary ends sort of lend nicely to our instincts, as a creature, who instinctually wants to mate and procreate and do all of those things that are innate within us, just like the animals. They do all those things too. but the difference is we are rational, and so and with rational also comes this the law of God, which is revealed to us about what marriage is really about between men and women, as opposed to between you know um you know uh different animals, from lower species. But like between men and women, we've had, it revealed by God himself through divine revelation that men and women should do these things, for specific reasons, according to to specific reasons, according to the laws of God, for us, not just whatever feels good or seems exciting or new or different. I think that was maybe even one of the words, spicing things up, trying new things,
Yeah.
this is the kind of language they use, trying to keep, because if sex is going to fix the world, then you got to keep people engaged and trying new things and doing new things. And then you have justification for various unnatural acts. And that's been kind of the whole discussion with this video. But yeah, I think that trying to just well, it's potentially just very misleading, and it's potentially, I see these kind of tweet, and it kind of makes me raise my eyebrows. I'm just like, I don't know what's going on with this, with this kind of tweet,
Yeah.
what is this about, but because yeah, why are you in, what's this weird insistency about how we need to, be more in tune with our animal instincts, when it comes to sort of sexual behavior, um, or since those things are innate within us because of our animal nature, we need to remember to subordinate them to higher reasoning, which we have. The animals don't, because we are made in the image of God, and so we have to subject our instinct to right reason. I mean, that would be more. That's sort of more what the church teaches, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, yeah, definitely. And one thing I did want to make sure I mentioned too, something that you and I talked about, but going through Nolan's Twitter account, I did want to make sure I emphasize there's a lot that he says that we both admitted was good. There's a lot of good stuff
Mhm.
there. A lot of good principles as far as leadership for husbands, a lot of good practical things as men. I was going through his Twitter account, just kind of seeing, like trying to research and stuff to see where he comes from. I thought, a lot of this is really good advice. The one thing I did notice is he very frequently, every few tweets, has to bring it back again to intimacy, marital act, the topic of sex. It's so frequent. That again, this is which makes up the whole idea of like you need this to have the fulfilling life. This will make things all better. I think it's like the idea that they're coming from, because he talks about it a lot. There's like an over emphasis on it,
Mhm.
which again is what we get a lot from Gordon's videos, right? On this whole thing. So the last thing I want to finish with is this final tweet that I got from Nolan's account, which I thought was worthy talking about. I had to blur out every image because it was, just very scandalous and immodest. But he wrote, "Show me a man with a fat wife, and I'll show you a man who's been a weak leader. Here's a quick visual guide to what your wife's body is telling you." Now, essentially, what he's showing is, different female figures, different weights and sizes of women, not wearing much, you could say, and how he has like, well, the thin one is your inspirational, then a few pounds more you're losing me, a few pounds more you're friend zoned, and then finally you failed me. And the point that he's trying to make with this is trying to say that, and so his basic point is this, that men have to lead by example. This is the point he's trying to make, that if men are healthy, their wives want to be healthy, but if men are unhealthy, then their wives are going to be unhealthy, right? This is the point he's trying to go with. But again, to me, it's just indicative of the whole approach, or the whole view, I guess you could say, the lens on which things are seen and talked about from that side of things, that it ranks and judges it on the idea of like, here is the attractive, beautiful look. And then, the more you go, here comes the fat, disgusting look, that, where you've obviously been a failure to this person because they've obviously failed themselves. And again, what this does psychologically, emotionally to women that come across it, what it does spiritually to men who come across it. Again, the idea being, look, I've said this before. I said this on the last podcast. If you want to approach it from the idea of, hey, it'd be great if we got healthy. Health is a good thing. And I say that's beautiful. That's true. That's good. That's right in line with St. Thomas. It's in line with our faith. Being healthy is good. Inspiring one another to good health is good. But you, again, go about it a virtuous, holy way. Get the world out of the way you try to pose these issues. Because when you bring the world into it,
Mhm.
like we said, you're bringing the tools of the revolution into the very thing you're trying to combat, and it corrupts the whole thing. You know, those
Mhm.
types of things don't need to be public from Catholic accounts where you're basically promoting yourself as, I'm a Catholic leader to teach Catholic men to be good Catholic husbands. You got to set your bar higher. And again, I'm trying to say this out of charity and like, genuinely sharpening. Iron sharpens iron to sharpen. If you're going to teach on these
Mhm.
things, and he has lots of good things he says, but when it comes to these specific types of things, raise the bar higher. Don't deviate. Don't give a margin of error on it and say, well, I guess it's fine if I use images like this or use words like this, or we got to keep ourselves to a higher standard because we're dealing with again spiritual combat when it comes to these things. But
Mhm.
that was the final thing I want to say on that. But anything you want to close off with, brother?
Yeah, I mean, just comment on that as well. As I mean, it's just I think we've kind of pointed the same, given the same answer for a lot of things, but this is an un-Catholic kind of materialistic um, view, a very reductionist view of marriage and masculinity too, because he tried to put out the idea of like leading and being masculine in his tweets a lot. This treats the woman uh, you know, of her worth by her appearance. Again, it's just weird stuff that the church has never really taught, that husband's leadership or the wife's, are judged by the wife's physical appearance, or her virtue is based on her weight or waist size or whatever. Um, it actually emphasizes things that are vain and fleeting and um you know and sometimes due to no fault of the person. You have many people who are very overweight because of uh honestly no fault of their own. There's a lot of diseases, so there's a
Yeah,
lot of junk in our food and all that stuff, but not to make an excuse for people who should do better to take care of themselves. There's a vice there associated with overeating and with not taking care of yourself. But nevertheless, so many people work very hard and still struggle to have a certain waist size or a certain weight. But these kinds of teachings are, I mean, I wouldn't say it's teachings, but it's all this advice that he gives to men and women is based on sort of power dynamics,
yeah,
transactional power dynamics of whether, like, you know you're a real man if this and that, and you're not a good woman, and you're other strange things about how much a man is supposed to spend on his wife, and how much w- you know um what a woman uh just very vain things. Yeah, I don't
yeah,
know, just it's all just more that superficial stuff you
yeah.
saw in some of original um,
The trailer.
promotional video.
Yeah,
Yeah, you kind of see that in his work, and I think maybe that's just because, like, he's trying to blend naturalistic, materialistic approaches to sort of how to self-improve yourself
yeah,
with, like, Catholic teaching,
yeah,
and so then you get kind of a lot of confusion.
yeah. I agree. I agree. Well, I want to say once again, thanks again for coming on and giving us your
Mhm.
time. I think this was again a great episode. We covered a lot of information. And anyone that's interested, you can check out our part 1 on what a woman is not, and that was about 2 hours 20 minutes roughly. This one we're hitting right near the
Mhm.
2 hour mark. So between the two, over 4 hours of information on really again what our hope is to promote a virtuous, holy, chivalrous patriarchy, and to truly encourage Gordon, Nolan, and others to raise their bar up in how they are promoting the goals against the revolution, to be counter-revolutionary and combating feminism and extolling patriarchy, which are good goals, but we have to do it according to the tradition of the church in a way that's sanctifying and virtuous. That's the important thing. But thanks again, brother, for joining us, and thank you all for watching.
Yep.
And let's go ahead and close with a prayer. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. Remember, most gracious Virgin Mary, that never was it known that anyone who fled to thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, we fly into thee, O sweet Virgin of Virgins, our Mother. To thee do we come, before thee we stand, sinful and sorrowful. Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not our petitions, but in thy love and mercy hear and answer us. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, we love you. Save souls. In the name of the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost. Amen. All right. God bless all of you, and we will see you soon.